Hey guys, Nicky Skevich back again with Daily Fantasy Winners and the next edition of Tee to Green. And this one is for the Open, and this year it is at Birkdale, which is right near Southport over in the UK. And diving right on into this tournament, this is obviously the third major of the year, so it is going to be a very strong field. The cut for this major is the traditional top 70 plus ties. And so you're going to have a typical 150 plus person field in this event, and we're obviously eliminating about half the field as usual. The Open, if you're comparing some major to the Open to some of the other major championships, so obviously Augusta National is the venue for the Masters every year. The U.S. Open gets rotated very inconsistently. I would say they only like to go back to course once every 10 years or so. The PGA Championships usually just spread out all over the place, kind of in some form of a similar manner. So the Open here is on an inconsistent rotation as well, but they use a smaller core of courses, I would say, and some courses do get used a little bit more frequently than others. And so this is, again, like I said, this is at Birkdale, and Birkdale has been used before several times, but it has not been used since 2008, and really in recent memory, it's only been used about every 10 years or so. So that is the last time Birkdale again was used. And if you, obviously some people will be going back to look at the 2008 tournament, of course, just for some kind of some course and data research and everything like that. If you do that, you will notice how high the scores were that day. Padraig Harrington won the event with 3 over. But what's crazier than Harrington winning the tournament at 3 over was the fact that there were only 4 scores in the entire field that were better than 10 over par. So obviously it was extremely difficult back in 08. And so obviously if you watch that tournament or you go back and take a look at like just even some YouTube or video clips, it was obviously very windy and rainy occasionally at times. And I'm going to get into the weather a little bit later in this video, but it is supposed to be very windy again this year as well. Right now we're seeing to expect about 15 to 20 mile an hour winds every day, during the tournament, maybe like 10 to 15 miles an hour on Sunday. But I'm not going to say it's going to play as tough this year as it did back in 08, but there's no doubt that I think that this Open will have some pretty difficult scoring conditions, certainly, and we could see some people struggle out there, and so we will see exactly what happens when it comes. But in any case, let's dive into Royal Birkdale, the golf course for this event. It is a par 70, tipping out at 7,156 yards. There are 2 par 5s on this course, holes 15 and 17, both par 5s on the back 9 and pretty close to one another. Number 15 is 542 yards. Number 17 is 567. There were 12 eagles total back here in 2008. But if you want to go back also just to try and get as much course data as possible, you have to go back to 98 for the next previous time that Birkdale hosted the Open. And we actually saw, I believe it was about 35 eagles, 36 eagles there in 1998. So obviously there were a lot more eagles to be had in 98. Now, obviously, if you compare the scoring conditions of 98 and 08, 08 was certainly tougher. The winning score in 08 was, like I said, 3 over. The winning score in 98 was by Mark O'Meara, and that was even par, and there were a lot more golfers right behind O'Meara, certainly in 98 as well. So you have to factor in, obviously, that some of that is certainly the scoring conditions, but at the same time, in 98, the golf course played about 100 yards shorter. They lengthened the golf course slightly from 98 to 08, but unfortunately, I could only find the total distance. I couldn't find the exact distance of the par 5s back in 98, so I don't know if that yardage got added to one or both of the par 5s, or if it was added to some of the other holes. But I will just say this, regardless what the exact reasons were, I don't think length is going to matter a whole lot for the Eagles here. And the main part is because we have a kind of a link style golf course here, if you will, and you take a look at both of the par 5s, there's basically a lot of room to run the shots up to the green. It's not like long forced carries, essentially like you might see in some other courses like over water hazards or, like huge bunkers or huge elevation, things of that nature. And so there will be a lot, basically having, fairway woods and everything like that for maybe some of the shorter length hitters, for some of those low running shots up through the fairway that roll onto the green to kind of keep it out of the wind, that'll definitely be a route for them to go. And so I just don't think length will matter too much here when it comes to the Eagles standpoint. And so some other things about this golf course, just really quick. This is a narrowish golf course, but really it's not incredibly tight, but it's narrowish. But really what makes this golf course particularly difficult is definitely the wind. It's really what makes it tough because you got very high grass off the fairway. You can get really nasty lies, a lot of side hills in that high grass, and then occasionally you'll get some penalty strokes mixed in there as well. And then obviously some other things you'll see on, we usually see it at the Open are the typical like pot bunkers you see a lot of the times, and they're going to be all over the place on this course, both fairway bunkers and greenside bunkers. There's all kinds of pot bunkers everywhere. And so basically when you're watching this golf tournament, it's very much going to look like an open course if you haven't seen this track before. So, okay, I'm actually just going to get right on into the strategy, and this will be more the focal point of this video this week. So statistics. Okay, so we only have 1 year of data from the strokes gained standpoint to go off of for this golf course, which is back in 2008. And so if you do take a look at the top of that leaderboard, it was definitely a strokes gained tee to green course, more than the strokes gained putting element. But even when you look at some of the other Open Championship venues that have been used, and actually I should correct myself, it's apparently called the Open and not the Open Championship. Now they changed it again. I think it was last year actually they changed it. But okay, so the Open, when you look at some of their other venues that they've used, a lot more of those are also strokes gained tee to green courses, and a lot of times what you can get is when in these windy conditions, basically the tee to green element can become particularly important because of hitting golf shots in the wind. It can be particularly difficult in like controlling ball flights and trajectories and hitting to the right spots. And so what I am expecting here for this tournament, what's going to be the most important is strokes gained tee to green. And of the three elements that make up strokes gained tee to green, which are strokes gained off the tee, strokes gained approaching the green, and strokes gained around the green, I do believe strokes gained approaching the green will be the most important of the three for pretty much the same reasons that I just articulated, as far as controlling the ball flight and the trajectory of hitting shots into certain greens to certain pin locations with the wind blowing everywhere and not leaving yourself in really bad spots and mishitting shots and again, also the other thing is if you mishit iron shots or even wedge shots in these heavier winds, then the ball just dies and it doesn't really go anywhere. With tee shots, yes, it's going to matter too, of course, as well. But I don't think it actually matters as much, even though the ball is technically going a farther distance. And I'm primarily saying that just because it's you obviously have much bigger targets to go off of in terms of landing in the fairways, and you have a lot of different options you can play off these tee boxes. This isn't like an incredibly long golf course where you really are forced to hit driver on like a lot of these holes. So some of the guys will end up hitting their fairway woods and long irons and hit these low burner type of shots to keep the ball out of the wind. And so everyone will have different strategies, and they can kind of counteract that a little bit more off the tee. But it's really the approaching the green where I think it's going to become particularly important. And last thing I'll just throw in on the strokes gained element is, a lot of times when I talk about strokes gained tee to green, I mainly focus on the strokes gained off the tee and the strokes gained approaching the green, because I think those are a little bit more predictive measures, certainly, than strokes gained around the green. But strokes gained around the green does certainly show up here a little bit, and you mainly see that because this is a course or the Open Championships or Opens, you can see a lot of times a little more of the scrambling element comes into play because a lot of bump and run chips, a lot of the winds. It's just a different kind of an experience than most of the time you get on the PGA Tour, where you don't. It's just the strokes gained around the green doesn't come into play just as much. It'll come into play more here when people are trying to scramble around these types of greens, and it's just overall different. And I'm going to get into a little bit more on that here in just a second. So in any case, let's see. So that's all I have really on the statistics angle, but I got several other things here from a strategy standpoint. Just remember that the European Tour and other international events do not count toward PGA Tour stats. It's just PGA Tour events. The Open is included in that, I believe, as well. But other than that, it's just all the PGA Tour events. And so for European and international players, it's also good to look at those guys over the last few years and some of their strokes gained stats, just so you get like a better sample. And you look at some of their European Tour results and just understand that like whatever good stuff they did on those days or in those tournaments, that those stats aren't factored into whatever strokes gained stats are showing up. So it's just a good idea. It gives you a bigger sample and a little bit better of an understanding of how that plays out. So okay, so after that, yeah, good ball strikers, like I said, good tee to green stuff. So Open Champ, or the Open experience. So just having experience in this golf tournament, I think this matters here actually a little bit more, and not necessarily the venue itself. I just mean playing in the Open. I actually think matters a little bit more than most tournaments, and just because it is more unique than most of the other tournaments, and most of the time what the people see on the PGA Tour, and a lot of times you'll see with past champions, and you take a look at them, or people who do well, they usually on their first time playing in the Open, usually for most people, not everybody, but most people, it usually isn't a great experience the first time. Or when I say a great experience, I should say they usually don't perform near the top of the leaderboard. That's a better way to explain it. And so, of course, there are occasionally like a few of the top players who do end up playing there for the first time, and they can end up doing fine, and that's obviously understandable. But if you take a look at the past Open champs, you take a look at Henrik Stenson last year, first time winner, but obviously one of the best players on tour, certainly a veteran in the golfing world. You take a look at Zach Johnson in 2015 when he won. Obviously that was a second major championship win, but he won the Masters back in 2007, and he is certainly an experienced player as well. And going back to some of the other winners, like you take a look at Darren Clark in 2011, Ernie Els, Phil Mickelson, even more recently than Darren. And so there's a lot of, and even Rory McIlroy when he won just a few years ago, I think it was 2014. What was interesting about that is a lot of people thought, that was still in the young part of his career, and it is, but he had actually played in the Open, I believe it was 6 or 7 times before that. Like Rory had already had a ton of experience at the Open before that win of his. And so it's just something to say that like first timers for the Open, I'm usually a little more hesitant on, and I'm especially a little bit more hesitant on it for the American side. And that actually is going to bring me into my next point here. The European and international players, there's a lot of people it's a little bit of a narrative. I don't know if I would call it a narrative exactly, but there's an opinion out there, and some people believe that European players and international players have a big edge in this over Americans just because it is a different type of a golf course and it's really unique. But I will say this, it actually does not matter today or these days in recent memory as it did in years past. That's mainly just because it's much easier to travel, and golf is just more global these days. It's easier to get more experience on different types of courses. So obviously it's very pretty easy to understand. And you also have to understand that if you just look at a leaderboard at the Open and you see there's a bunch of like international European guys near the top, well, you should look at the entire leaderboard and just simply understand that there are more European and international players in this major in comparison to the other majors. It's both numbers and percentage wise. It's just you should definitely understand that. But the one part where I will say I think there is some truth to this, and I just had touched on it a little bit ago, was I think in terms of the younger guys who are getting their first, second, third experiences in the Open, I do think the younger guys from the European side have a little bit of an edge, or the international guys have a little bit of an edge over the American players, just because they'll have more experience on playing those types of courses growing up in their youth, and they're just going to have more experience and they're going to be more comfortable. And this is especially true when we get into the wind element. I'm going to touch on that in just a second, actually, because I do want to mention this before I forget, because I brought up the travel. So obviously the John Deere happened last week, and players will be took the red eye from the Quad Cities over to the UK, and they're obviously arrived there on Monday. I am someone who definitely believes in time zone differential plays a significant factor, and it's not just because it's the Open this week. It can be like Abu Dhabi going into Torrey Pines. We've seen this happen with a lot of guys traveling overseas and playing the following week, and they struggle a little bit at Torrey Pines. I'm just usually someone that doesn't mean like, okay, like Zach Johnson won a couple of years ago and he played at the John Deere and then actually end up winning at the Open. So it's not like it's 100% formula by any means. But at the same time, I do think that there is you have to downgrade people slightly who did play at the John Deere this week, who are just getting there, and it's more the time zone differential than anything. And it's just to kind of make a comparison to maybe like another sport. if you take a look at, like, sometimes people talk about the time differential with the games in London in the NFL. The difference in comparing like golf to the NFL there, in the NFL, first of all, you've got two teams playing one another. Everybody is exposed to it. In golf, you obviously are playing the golf course, and some people are going to be a lot more people are going to be are going to be acclimated to the time zone differential than maybe some others who arrive there late. Golf is an individual sport where you are single-handedly responsible for 100% of your output, and when you're on a team, you are only responsible for a percentage of what the output's going to be. Obviously, from a fantasy standpoint, yes, you're responsible for your own stats, but in terms of team production, there's correlation to how your individual output's going to be, so on and so forth. And even though obviously football will be a much more physically demanding sport from the time when you're actually playing on the field or on the course, the time in football, you actually only have to get up for you have to get up for like a 3.5 hour game or whatever it is. And golf, you actually, it's a much longer day. And then it's also in terms of like being on the golf course for like 5 hours, but you're also doing it for 4 consecutive days. And when it comes to jet lag, that can linger. And if you've done any kind of jet lag or any kind of like long travel where there's jet lag, you understand like how it can really sustain over like several days essentially. So I don't know, just my opinion on that, but I think there's some pretty good data out there that suggests that time zone difference does make a difference there a little bit for the people who are traveling there just a handful of days beforehand. And so again, just one factor of many things to contribute to consider here. But going back to the wind players here in a second, because I just started to touch on that. Some years this will matter more than others at the Open because obviously you'll have some years where there's very windy conditions and some years the wind won't be as bad. So you have really wide varying winning scores here at this tournament too, like Padraig Harrington with 3 over in 2008. And we've seen mid to upper teens under par at the Open. And so it's just, again, so it's like a very wide range of winning scores. So for this year, it looks like it's going to be very windy. So I think good wind players here are definitely a positive thing to look at. If you have a model of some sort that can factor in like wind score, like FantasyLabs obviously has that, definitely use that variable some. A lot of times, though, you'll just by watching tournaments and having PGA DFS experience and even just doing a little bit of research on which tournaments had tough windy conditions, and you can just kind of see who's done well. There's a lot of ways you'll know just kind of who good wind players are. You can use the apex height, the statistic on PGAtour.com. I'm still a little skeptical on just using that, as your only measure for wind. And the only reason why I say that is because you can have players who traditionally hit high ball flights and they'll have a really high apex number, but when they get actually onto golf courses where a lower ball flight is better to keep it out of the wind, they'll actually have no problem doing that, and they'll just hit it effectively. And so it's a positive thing when you're considering, okay, we're getting a really good sample size of all tee shots on par 4s and par 5s to get the apex number. But the problem is it's only you're wanting to know just how good are people in terms of hitting how good are they in hitting lower ball flights in the windier conditions, because sometimes the apex just doesn't really determine that. It determines a little bit. It's a little bit of an indicator, but it's not like, I don't think it's like a great indicator, certainly because of what I just said. So hopefully that makes sense. And so, and also this last thing, this is where I just like to look at, just to wrap up on that, is like when it comes to the wind, this is where experience can matter a little bit more in the Open, who has played in some windier conditions, and particularly in the Open when it's like a major championship, there's obviously a lot at stake. And so this is where some of the times the veteran type of players can do well in windier conditions, certainly as well. And so, okay. And then the last thing here for strategy is just the regression tools over at DailyFantasyWinners.com. Obviously use those as well, particularly the putting tool, certainly for this week. So, okay, I want to touch on weather here in the specifics. And the specifics are we're getting a lot of wind and a lot of rain. So on Wednesday, the practice round, the last practice round day, obviously, 15 to 20 mile an hour winds with a 60% chance of rain all day. Thursday is 15 to 20 mile an hour winds with a very tiny chance of rain. And it would be in the morning, but that's like the driest day of all of them. Then Friday, we have a 15 to 25 or 15 to 20 mile an hour winds with an 80% chance of rain in the morning and early afternoon. On Saturday, 15 to 20 mile an hour winds, 50% chance of rain all day. And then Sunday, we have 10 to 15 mile an hour winds with a 70% chance of rain all day. And we even have some rain and wind to deal with on the days following that if they have to delay, which the Open really does not like to do. The RNA does not like to do that. But if they do have to do that, there's more rain and wind coming. So it's going to be tough. I don't think it'll be as tough as 08. It's just hard to see that, but maybe it will. But I have to think that 10 years. I just have to think from a tournament 9-10 years ago that the scores would just, even if the conditions were the exact same, I think the play was just going to be a little bit better just based on who's in the field. But I don't know. Could be wrong on that. But we'll see how it plays out. But anyways, as far as planning purposes and tee time waves, the winds are supposed to be just up the entire day, morning and afternoon and even evening. Like, it's just supposed to blow there the entire time. So the good news out of that is you probably won't have to worry about a tee time edge and panic about like switching lineups, because every once in a while when you do make your lineups obviously in advance, you check the weather Wednesday night and then you realize you need to tweak it. It can be kind of annoying. On the bad news side, if you have the other perspective, is there's no edge in this area to gain, and this is often a tournament where tee time edges can be huge because tee times work at the Open a little bit differently than other tournaments. And how that works is obviously the days in terms of sunlight are longer over there right now. You have or obviously just the sun's up for a longer period of time. And so what you have in a 150 person field here in the States is you'll have a Thursday morning, Friday afternoon tee time wave, or a Thursday afternoon, Friday morning tee time wave. And they'll tee guys off of holes 1 and 10. What they actually do here, or by here I mean what they do here at the Open, is they tee everybody off of hole 1. They don't do holes 1 and 10. So they put everybody off of hole 1 because they have more sunlight to play with. And the other thing you should also know is that they still do a morning and tee time wave, or morning and afternoon tee time wave, like Thursday morning, Friday afternoon, Thursday afternoon, Friday morning. The only difference is the tee time differential of when you would like the spacing of when you tee off in morning and afternoon. The timing's just a little bit different. And honestly, at the end of the day, you're probably not going to have to worry about this. But just in case, if we get closer, I'm doing this on a Monday early evening. If we get to Wednesday and the weather looks like the winds are going to be like a lot higher on Thursday or a lot higher on Friday, and at a certain point in the day, then maybe we can take a look at switching some of this for the strategy angle. But honestly, I'm very if it's supposed to be wind and rain just all week and there's just no gap or there's nothing to worry about really with timing, it's hard to see that there's going to be anything at least predictive that we're going to be able to take advantage of here. And maybe there's something crazy with the weather and there's variance, because the weather does change over there it can change over there pretty drastically at random points. But from a predictive standpoint, it's hard to see it happening, at least right now. So anyway, sorry, I was rambling a little bit there. All right, so we'll check in on that Wednesday with the weather, just to double check as usual. And then last thing before the picks, reminder, for those of you who usually obviously don't do European Tour events and just do PGA Tour, I say this every year, this is a European Tour event, meaning the event's in Europe, and I say that for the sake of lock times. The lock is not like 6 whatever in the morning for you on Thursday morning. The lock I believe for the Eastern time zone in the States is 1:30 in the morning, which obviously means it would be 10:30 at night on Wednesday night. So the lock's definitely earlier. So if you're somebody maybe on the West Coast and you're planning on doing your lineups Wednesday night, you could be panicking and trying to rush at the last second, or you may not get your entries in potentially. So I always like to say that just as a reminder. You got to be a little bit more, just a little bit more proactive here this week. Okay, picks. There are a ton of guys $10,000 and above on DraftKings. looking at just the odds without even looking at the price point, or the price point of DraftKings, we have 11 guys that are better than 30 to 1 or better than 30 to 1 odds to win the tournament, and no one is better than 13 to 1. So you have 11 guys crammed in between 13 to 1, starting with Dustin Johnson, and all going all the way down to 30 to 1. And there's even a few guys just behind the 30 to 1 mark as well. And so essentially what I do believe this means is, since we have a lot of the top players, obviously with kind of roughly, not the same exact odds, but kind of in that same range. And we have a lot of guys priced also $10,000 to $12,000, and you know, like the upper 9K range. I just think we're going to have a lot of spread out ownership here for the expensive guys on DraftKings, similar to what it was like at the U.S. Open. We had pretty much everybody was between, it seemed like 10 and 20%. I know a few guys got a little bit higher than that, but I think it's going to be pretty spread out again here at the Open. If you just take a look, go through all 11 guys there, 10K and above, and even into the 9K range, you know, there are a few things to like about every golfer. There are a few things not to like about, I think, about every golfer. And so it's just one of those things where I don't think there's just somebody that's going to have outrageously high ownership, just the way it's going to work out this week. So if you are worried about any kind of an ownership standpoint from the expensive guys in GPPs, I just really wouldn't be too concerned with it, depending, obviously, of course, how many lineups you're making. And so, but anyways, I'm going to give you a couple of my favorite picks here. I'm going to give you three guys here, and then I'm going to actually talk about a fourth person here in a second. So as far as the 10K and above on DraftKings, and I'll touch on this in FanDuel in a second, but for the 10K and above on DraftKings, Sergio Garcia would probably be my favorite play here. He's 10,600 on DraftKings. He's 9,400 on FanDuel, so he's obviously great on both sites. He is definitely fitting the categories of strokes gained tee to green. He's a very good ball striker, of course, having an awesome season. The strokes gained putting regression tool likes him, obviously. Great upside and consistency as he's shown, and he has really good experience at the Open as well. I think he's fantastic in both formats, especially in cash formats. His ownership will be, even though, like I said, the ownership will be spread out, his ownership will be a little bit on the higher side, probably like 20%, maybe even as high as 25%, but that would be it at most, and that is perfectly fine to play Sergio in cash and GPPs. It's 100% okay. So I've got two more guys. I usually keep it to one above 10K and one below 10K, but for this, just because there's some different prices here with DraftKings and FanDuel, I'm going to bring them both up. So for DraftKings, Justin Rose is 10,300, but he's 8,700 on FanDuel. So really good value for Justin Rose on FanDuel. He probably will be owned, obviously, as a result, a little bit higher on FanDuel, certainly. But at the same time, I do very much like Justin Rose this week. You could argue he's slightly under the radar even this coming into this tournament, which is a little odd to say, but he's obviously, there's nothing wrong with the way he's playing, and obviously very similar to Sergio, very good tee to green player, and fits, and he's got the Open experience as well. So that's obviously a very good thing. And then the last person I will mention who's a little bit better of a price on DraftKings, Hideki Matsuyama, 9.5K on DK. He's $9,000 on FanDuel, so slightly cheaper on FanDuel, but obviously on DraftKings, most players are obviously going to be more expensive usually. So not a bad value for Hideki for 9K on FanDuel. And once again, kind of the same, we're kind of going along with the same theme of he's got a little bit of Open experience under his belt, not as much as the other two, but he's still got good Open experience, and he's played pretty well there. He's in very good form, very much a good tee to green player, and everything like that. So those are the three guys that I probably like the most. Again, I think this is one of those things, if you're making like 150 lineups, you're like 100 lineups, whatever, however many you're making, if you're making a ton, essentially, this is definitely a situation where I would probably not try and go all out on one person or two people. I would try and, just buy a fair amount of shares on a lot of people, and then just kind of, not necessarily fade all out, but just kind of keep it a little bit weaker ownerships, and pick a couple guys that you want to weed out a little bit, maybe, or just to lower it down to like 5% or something like that, and then try and pick up a couple core guys you want to go maybe like 30, 35%, maybe 20, 25, I don't know, whatever you want to do, and then have everybody else maybe just in that 15, 20% range, whatever it is in terms of how you want to emphasize your player pool. I'm using a very generic example, and obviously being not very specific here, but it just obviously depends on how many you're doing, and what exactly you want to do. I am not a huge fan of going 100% on one person here coming into this event, especially when it's super windy and everything like that. It's just I wouldn't run the wind can cause variance sometimes, and it can mess with you. So, and we've seen that with majors certainly in the past. So I wouldn't do that. Anyways. Last person I wanted to touch on here, just because I do think this is the one guy that will have pretty high ownership who's expensive on DraftKings. Ricky Fowler. He's 9,200 on DraftKings, and he's 9,600 on FanDuel. So obviously he is way better value on DraftKings. And so on DraftKings, he is going to get, I would say, at least 25% ownership. He might get as much as like 30%. I don't think it'll be higher than 30. Maybe it will be, because unlike the Millionaire Maker, because it's such a public tournament, it might get up to 35. But I think it's going to be more than that 25, 30, probably 30% range. Yeah, probably about 30% is about right. I haven't done my exact ownership projections yet, but that's about what he'll be. And so I do certainly like Ricky Fowler a decent amount going into this event. He's obviously a fantastic ball striker, and he definitely likes playing in the wind and is openly, admittedly saying that, or has said that. But at the same time, and he's obviously got great form, but this isn't a situation where I really like Ricky Fowler like the most of everybody, or easily by far more than the other guys around him. So I'm only just bringing this up. If you're only making one or two GPP lineups out there, it's not a bad idea probably just to go with a couple of the other guys around that price point, or however, or just go a different direction, just because he will be the highest owned golfer on DraftKings in that area and around that price point. And if he isn't, I will be very shocked if that's not the case. So in any case, I just want to throw that out there. It's not like I by no means am I saying fade him if you're making a bunch of lineups. That's a recipe for disaster, because there's every reason to expect him to go ahead and play well here. But it's just if you're making one or two GPPs, it's not a bad idea to go elsewhere with, I think, like an expected 30% ownership. So. Okay, that's it. Obviously, if you, I will have more stuff in the forum throughout the week and over the next couple days, more or less. And then I also, if you missed it, I did post a GPP strategy video within the last couple days. So obviously, you can check that out on our YouTube channel. It's a very recent video that I did, or you can check it out over at the website in the forum section as well, or in the video stream over on the website. It's posted a few different places on Twitter as well. So in any case, so that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to follow me, you can. I'm at Nick Yuskevich on Twitter. Daily Fantasy Winners is on Twitter at DFantasyWinners. And then you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and it would be greatly appreciated. All right. Thanks, guys, and good luck.